Greetings and salutations, friends, neighbors, listeners, viewers. Paladin here, coming to you on March 15th, 2018, a day maybe best remembered in history as the Ides of March. 2062 years ago today, Gaius Julius Caesar was assassinated in a Roman Senate meeting that was held in the theater of Pompeii. Caesar got up that morning, and his wife Calpurnia had told him of a dream that she had had holding him in her arms after he was murdered. Two stories diverge here. One story is that Caesar did not pay it any attention. The other one indicates that Caesar had some people perform some sacrifices to try to get good omens. None of them were good, and eventually Marcus Brutus prevailed upon him to come. On the way there, he saw the seer who had previously warned him about beware the Ides of March during one of his military parades. Caesar stopped and said, "The Ides of March have come," to which the seer said, "Aye, they have come, but they have not gone." Caesar then proceeded to the meeting and was stabbed 23 times. Mark Antony had gotten word of a plot the night before, and when he was on his way to the Senate, they had designated I forget the guy's name, but they had designated another senator to detain him outside. They did. Once Mark Antony, as it's reported, heard the commotion going on inside, he fled because he knew what was going on. So what we have from Caesar, some very interesting historical information, of course, reported over 2,000 years ago, so I guess you have to kind of maybe take all of it with a grain of salt. But when I was in high school, we all had to take a language class. Most people took Spanish, some people took French, and very few of us took Latin. I count myself among them. I took 2 years of Latin. So the way they taught us, because Latin is not a spoken language anymore, although we did speak it as we recited our writings, we translated it from English to Latin and back on paper. Back then we wrote it, so it was more of a written language, although a lot of the English words are come from Latin derivatives or derived from Latin root words. But anyway, one of the famous quotes or historical markers in Caesar's life is when he returned in, I believe it was 50 BC, from his successful campaign in Gaul, and he quote unquote crossed the Rubicon and brought a legion with him, which he was not supposed to do. You weren't supposed to bring an army into your own country, which he did. And it's reported that he famously said, "The die is cast." Pompey, who was part of the first triumvirate with Caesar, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Caesar, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Pompey formed the first triumvirate. If you watched the Spartacus series on Stars, you would see that a young Caesar had formed an alliance with Crassus to defeat the slaves led by Spartacus. At around the time that they were able to do that, Pompey returned from his successful campaigns outside of Italy, and that's when they formed the first triumvirate. At the time that Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 50 BC, Crassus had been killed 3 years earlier. Pompey was ruling in Rome while Caesar was away. Pompey said declared him a traitor. When he heard Caesar was coming back to Rome with a legion, he fled Rome, and was eventually killed in Egypt. And Caesar supposedly, when he went to Egypt, to the time that he hooked up with Cleopatra, had the person who killed his enemy Pompey had him decapitated and put his head up on a spike. So that was how Caesar dealt with what he viewed as, even though Pompey was an enemy at that point, viewed as people who had the gall, I suppose, or the intestinal fortitude, the guts to try to take on Rome, as he viewed it as a problem. So he had the guy's head cut off and put on a spike. Okay, so there's probably a lot I could talk about with Caesar, but I won't. But soon after he was killed, there was the second triumvirate formed with Lepidus, Mark Antony, and Octavian, who became Augustus Caesar. Octavian was Caesar's nephew, who Caesar had basically bestowed everything in his will, at least two-thirds of his fortune. And eventually Lepidus, I don't recall what happened, but Lepidus got out of the picture. Mark Antony went to Egypt, hooked up with Cleopatra after Octavian had basically set up a marriage between Mark Antony and his sister Octavia. Mark Antony went to Egypt, hooked up with Cleopatra, and I think the rest is history. I think the Mark Antony and Cleopatra story and the way it ended was Shakespeare's inspiration for writing Romeo and Juliet, with the two suicides at the end. All right, so the Ides of March, just keep that in mind. I do have a short update with Vegas, and that is that I'm starting to move away from the investigation of the autopsies. I'm going through now and doing an analysis. I'll probably have that ready and completed by the early part of next week, and I will, well, it's March Madness after all. I will put that out and discuss the findings there. I don't know if I'll put everything out or not. Some things I might want to hold back just because I think they may be relevant down the road. I do have a crack team of investigators working with me, both inside the White Hat community and outside. So I appreciate all their work and all their time spent on running these things down, because I come up with one or two things that I come across and I put them on it, and they were able to come up with the information pretty quickly. So one of the things, before I end this short broadcast, I was looking through. I finally had a chance to look through the search warrants that were issued by Las Vegas Metro after the shooting. And besides the fact that, Sheriff Lombardo comes out at 1:29 a.m. with his first news conference and talks about Mary Lou Danley, that they have a person of interest. And then at, I believe, 3:26 a.m. local time in Vegas, he came out and released Steve Paddock's name and said that they had engaged the suspect and killed him. This was in the first news conference at 1:29, but they didn't release his name at that point. And there are so many stories now of what happened. Lombardo's first press conference said we engaged the suspect and killed him. There was a report by CNN where they indicated that someone perhaps in the breach team had indicated that Paddock fled from the room, shot one of their officers, and then before they killed Paddock, in one of the early search warrants that was done over the phone the night of the shooting, the search warrant indicates that the officers breached the room, saw Paddock put a gun to his head and fire one round. When President Trump went to Las Vegas after the shooting, Lombardo introduced him to the person who killed one of the officers who killed Paddock. And then in another search warrant that we have come across that was executed later, or at least the petition or the whatever it's called to get the search warrant, Uh, it says in there that when they breached the room, they saw Paddock laying on the floor, dead from an apparent gunshot wound, a self-inflicted gunshot wound, which is exactly what it says in the FIT report. So now I think that must be the story that they're going to go with, that Paddock was dead when they breached the room. It's interesting that the FIT report, the report, the preliminary report, was done by the FIT team, who, as I understand, and I'll try to confirm this, is actually internal affairs. And internal affairs, for some of you who may or may not know, always investigates a officer-involved shooting. So I find it interesting that this wasn't done by homicide, but it was done by the FIT team. And if that's correct, then that would indicate to me that there was one of the Metro officers fired a shot in that suite. And I think there was at one point, and I'll check this, but I think there was one point in one or two of the press conferences that Lombardo did indicate that one of the officers did fire a shot, but it was an inadvertent shot. So anyway, all kinds of stuff going on with this thing. Another thing that I was reading as I was going over the search warrants last night, they asked for a search warrant for social media for Mary Lou Danley, and they indicate that she had erased her Facebook page at 12:30 a.m. on October 2nd. And I found this very, very interesting, so I went back and came up with the time for Lombardo's first press conference, which I believe was at 1:29. And in that press conference is when he said they engaged a suspect and he's dead, but he also said we're looking for Mary Lou Danley. So she erased or deleted her Facebook page an hour before there was any news as far as what happened, and that she was known as a person of interest, and 3 hours before they had announced that it was Stephen Paddock. So anyway, man, I'll tell you, a lot of these strange things going on in this investigation. So anyway, I just thought I'd give an update, and this due to my history of being in Latin class when I was in high school. I was thinking about today, the Ides of March, and how significant a day it is. I always wonder what they're doing in Rome today, how they're celebrating it or observing it. Maybe they're not celebrating it. Maybe they are. Caesar was viewed as a tyrannical dictator at the time that they assassinated him. But of course, if you read a lot of historical writings from writers who were there and writers after that, what they say, the opinion varies as far as whether Caesar was good or bad for Rome. But irrespective of that, this is the day 2062 years ago where he was assassinated. Okay, I'm going to watch some basketball and do some more work. So I will be checking in maybe first part of the week. I might have time to give an update over the weekend. If not, it'll be the first part of the week, and hopefully I'll have hopefully I will have the autopsy analysis finished and I can present that. Paladin out.